Right, so let's kick off. My name is Tamsin Farragut. I am leading the International Federation of Landscape Architects Climate Change Working Group. For those of you who might not know what landscape architects do, we plan, design, and manage natural and built environments, applying aesthetic and scientific principles to address ecological sustainability, quality and health of landscapes, collective memory, heritage and culture, and territorial justice. By leading and coordinating other disciplines, landscape architects deal with the interactions between natural and cultural ecosystems, such as adaptation and mitigation related to climate change, and the stability of ecosystems, socioeconomic improvements, the community health and welfare, to create places that anticipate social and economic well-being. It is a bit of a mouthful, but by the end of the session, you will hopefully have some very tangible examples of the work that we do. I'm going to pop the link to the IFLA website in the chat if you want to go and have a more detailed look. So the role of play today is we're going to start off with a very brief framing by Kerry Duncan. And we're very chuffed to have Kerry on the call. And thank you so much for helping to pull all of this together. Kerry is a very recent award winner from IFLA. She won the IFLA President's Award, which is presented by the President in recognition of an outstanding individual who, through their voluntary efforts within IFLA, have made a fundamental difference to the global profession of landscape architects. So thank you, Kerry, for your ongoing service and for not having given up on us. I'm going to hand over to you to do a bit of a framing. Tell us where you are and why. Let me just explain why it is that you specifically have been asked to give us the framing.
Okay, thanks very much, Tamsin, and thanks for the introduction. So right now I'm actually in my gas guzzling car, contributing to climate change, on my way back from an unforeseen meeting. But I'm in Morocco. And like those of you there are a couple of other people from Morocco on this call, and I guess there's some people from Southern Europe as well. And you will know what we're talking about when we're talking about heat and excessively hot temperatures. This past summer has been very long. We're the 1st of November, that's well into autumn. And the temperature today in the center of Morocco, so I'm not talking about a desert part or anything, on a temperate kind of area in Morocco, was 25 degrees. It's starting to cool down a little bit in the evenings, thanks to some rain we had last week. But if we'd actually had this, if we'd had this webinar on the 3rd of October as originally planned, I would have probably been dripping in sweat and as I talk to you, because the temperatures have just been so hot. And they've just seemed to go on and on and on. Every time you said, oh, summer's going to be over next week, or it's nearly autumn, it just didn't happen. And so this year, Morocco broke its temperature for its record for maximum temperature twice in 1 year. First in June in the central parts of Morocco, where the temperature was over 47 degrees. And then again in August in more southern part in Agadir, for those of you who know Morocco, where it was over 50 degrees. And I'm talking about official recorded temperatures. I'm not talking about the stuff on Facebook and Instagram where somebody's frying an egg on the bonnet of their car because they left it, in an unprotected parking lot. It's really, they're officially recorded temperatures. So it's actually quite scary. And if you've never felt 50-degree heat, then you're actually quite fortunate, because 50-degree heat for anybody who works in Fahrenheit is about 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can suffer from dehydration, quite serious dehydration because of excessive perspiration. So the body loses a lot of liquid, a lot of water, and it can actually become life-threatening. Other people suffer from heat exhaustion, nausea, vomiting, an elevated heart rate, which obviously puts the weaker people at risk, heat stroke, which is a medical emergency, and obviously things like sunburn or heat cramps and heat rash. So it is really very threatening to human existence. And of course, in urban areas, the urban heat island effect makes it even worse. And so today we're talking about landscapes, cities, heat cities and landscapes. So the urban heat island exaggerates all those effects because of all the hard surfaces, concrete, asphalt, of course, less vegetation in most of the cities that we know. And the vegetation, obviously, it helps cool down the air, not only by adding shade, but by through transpiration. It can cause temperatures to be reduced. And then, of course, in cities, there's increased energy consumption. There's such a concentration of people, so there are more machines going, more lights switching on, more in general.
For water.
Constellation.
You put the hose there and it fires water out.
Consumption of energy, and people switching on the aircon, so it's just like a sort of a cycle that just keeps going round and round and round. And so I'm really happy to be on this webinar and to hear from some professionals who are obviously a lot more qualified than I am to talk about it. So I'm interested to hear about some solutions from landscapes architects, from the heat officer, which is actually says a lot, that the United Nations has an official heat officer. I mean, that's like it shows how important the subject is. So with that, thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Kerry. And with that intro, I have the great pleasure of inviting Eleni or Lenio Mervilli, who is the Global Chief Heat Officer to the UN Habitat and the Asht Rock Resilience Center, who is building heat resilience in cities around the world. She is a senior advisor for urban heat and a senior fellow at the Asht Rock Center at the Atlantic Council. She is also a member of the EU Mission Board for Adaptation at the European Commission. Lenio has served as Deputy Mayor for the City of Athens, as well as Athens Chief Resilience Officer, and more recently as Athens's Chief Heat Officer. She also co-chaired the Resilient Cities Network Steering Committee. And interestingly, Lenio is an anthropologist, and she also has a PhD in anthropology from Columbia, where she has been a tenured professor for over a decade. We are so excited to have you on this call. Get going. Let's hear from you.
Thank you, Tamsin. Thanks for having me. It's been a while that Tamsin and I have been talking about resilience and heat resilience. I will, without further ado, I will share my presentation and try to. Can you guys see it?
We can, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, let me figure that out. Is that okay?
Perfect, yeah.
Great, thank you. As already said, so I'm not going to stay too long on this, but I'm going to kind of go over some of the stuff that were already said by Carrie, I think, yes. And as we more or less know, the 7 last years have been the hottest ever recorded, and this summer particularly was a very, very strange summer, where for the first time we saw this particular type of phenomenon, which is that we had these heat domes sitting on top of the south of the United States and Central America, the whole of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and also East Asia and China, and that was particularly in July. We had this extreme weather phenomena, but different parts of the world this summer have been hitting extreme temperatures. We know that the seas, the surface of the sea had recorded the highest temperature ever recorded this summer. We know that this September was the hottest September ever recorded. totally an extreme outlier from the usual months that are particularly hot. And also we know that in July, this July, we had the hottest day that has ever been recorded, which is since we started scientifically recording temperatures. Let me see, how do I move this? There we go. In Africa, in the last decade, from 1991 to 2021, we have an increase of temperature that is 0.1 degree higher than the previous decade. So we do have slightly above average. So because we know that, right, the globe that isn't heating up equally. There are different parts of it that are heating up faster. Europe is one of them, and I think that it's more or less approximately at the same or even a little bit faster than Africa. Because what we do see is that the parts of Africa that are heating up faster is North Africa, with other types of extreme weather phenomena like drought in the Horn of Africa and also in the very south kind of Africa as well as other extreme weather phenomena like extraordinary rainfalls and flooding in other parts of it. So it's very uneven, but we do have extraordinary droughts and heat waves that have been particularly severe in Africa during the last decade. And of course, there was this State of the Climate in Africa 2022 report that came out of the WMO that is worth looking into, which basically states that there is an extraordinary temperature increase in a continent that is responsible for less than 10% of of GHG gas emissions and global warming. And this has a particular effect on food insecurity, and which has created incredible amounts of displacement of millions of people, and also of course conflict. Agricultural productivity has been falling increasingly, which means that there is incredible amounts of money that go to billions. Like the projection is a tripling of the money that will be dedicated to importing foods, and adaptation financing is tiny, of course, in Africa. The loss and damages are rising, and one of the main things that is being kind of pointed to is that we don't have enough data for Africa, and that we need early warning systems for everyone, which is one of the UN main mandates that Antonio Guterres kind of set out for the whole world last year. We also have this kind of report which shows that the people affected most in Africa is from drought, and the deaths that we have are basically between droughts and flooding. The kind of data that we have in relation to deaths from heat are small and are minuscule. Actually, it's really difficult to get the type of data that show us a correlation between extreme heat and mortality. And this here, the deaths that are linked to drought, is I wonder whether what exactly they have to do with. But if we take into consideration this type of data collection, which shows for Europe between 1995 and 2018, the spectacular, the absolutely shocking amount of deaths that are linked to extreme heat in relation to all other types of disasters in Europe, I think it can tell us something. I mean, not necessarily equivalent, but because, of course, Africa has a different type of relationship to heat than Europe does. So we can't think that the mortality is similar in numbers. It might be lower, but still it's an indication. We also know that we have an incredible amount of urbanization happening the last few years, and we expect that we're going to have by 2050 68% or up to anyway almost 70% of the people in the world living in cities. And as we all know, we have in the center of cities, because of the reasons already discussed before, and I'm sure you all know better even than me, we have higher temperatures. And so this means that cities have to prepare, and they have to make sure that they have backups in their health services, because there is many more calls to emergencies. We need many more ambulances, and the numbers of people that are needed to support people in hospitals have to double up. But we also have to think about different types of infrastructure that we need to support the people during the extreme heat events. And so this is a whole kind of effort that cities have to go through in many different systems, urban systems that have to really be beefed up and create backups and diversification, so that they can manage to deal with saving people from extreme heat in urban areas. The exposure and vulnerability is also an interesting and shocking kind of story as far as heat is concerned, because somehow heat manages to go into the city and expose inequalities and pre-existing vulnerabilities. So older people, little children, pregnant women, people that are socioeconomically marginalized, that live in informal settlements, or have or work in the informal economy, or in the parts of our cities anyway that have the least the worst kind of infrastructure, and the people that are already have chronic health conditions from physical to mental are the people that are really the ones that are attacked by heat and that are most at risk from heat. We have this kind of data here, which is globally. We know that in the last decade or so, we have a significant increase of death, of mortality in populations above 65 years old that are linked to the rising heat. And a good going to the good news now is that we have figured out. There was a report that came out in the spring from Lancet, which actually looked at 94, I think, cities around Europe, and showed that indeed tree cover can actually, if it's more than 30% of a neighborhood or of a district or of a city, it can actually reduce temperatures to the point that it can prevent premature deaths, linking for the first time with very specific data tree canopy to lowering of mortality. And however, we still have very little kind of planning in cities around the world and in countries around the world that can actually support the type of initiatives and policies, as well as funding that we need for transforming our cities, such as creating green-blue infrastructures and really creating many more urban forests in the cities to help lower temperatures and ultimately save lives, but also save economies, which are particularly hit by the conditions. Some city examples, I'm sorry for the blurry thing here, is, these are my last two slides. We have seen in Medellin, Colombia, where they created 36 green corridors, a reduction of temperatures up to 4% Celsius. We have seen in Seoul, in South Korea, a reduction of temperatures in the neighboring districts to the stream. This I'm not going to try to pronounce it. This stream, which is almost 6 kilometers long, with green corridors to the green parks kind of running along it. We have seen a reduction of temperatures in the districts around it, reaching almost 6% Celsius. We have in Amsterdam a real an effort to create green roofs that have shown in public housing, that have shown that if you actually retain water and make sure that these green roofs have higher levels of water, the temperature, the lowering of temperature is significantly more than if you have green roofs that are the dry and dry type of, but which you probably already know. In Paris, there is this kind of urban acupuncture that is happening, trying to transform schoolyards into tiny little green kind of pocket parks. And in Melbourne, we have an incredible urban forest strategy and urban biodiversity, nature in the city strategy to try to really create a different Melbourne for the future generations, which is much healthier both for the humans and for the ecosystems. And it's an interesting example. In this final slide, I thought I would just kind of remind how for heat we do have a lot of different solutions that come from the past, when we didn't used to build based on the use of fossil fuels to heat and cool, and people have kind of this extraordinary knowledge and wisdom of how to build things that that was beautifully kind of that had beautifully adapted and used local conditions to figure out ways how to cool internally and externally the built environment. Some of the examples that we find in the global south are very much worth considering on how to link them to modern technologies and start to create the type of solutions that we need in cities to lower temperatures, which include different types of design for buildings. They include, of course, a radical increase of green and blue infrastructure, and it also includes the taking into consideration and bringing together the communities with which we, for whom we're trying to do this, and with which we should try to design and work together with to create these solutions. And I will finish here, and because I don't want to take too much time since we have a lot of speakers, I'm very happy to answer to any questions later. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much. Folks, get cracking in the chat box if you've got questions that you'd like Lenio to address. Hopefully there will be a little bit of time at the end to address them in person. But while you're thinking up your questions, I'd like to invite the next speaker, who's Carolina Pereira Rajidan. I hope I said your surname correctly. She will be discussing specific examples from cities around the African continent, just to give us an overview of heat-related work, but from the Red Cross and the Red Crescent Climate Centre's perspective, which is quite intriguing that they have a focus on climate adaptation and whatnot. So Carolina, in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to you. Fantastic, I'm seeing things happening. Okay, you need to go into presenter mode. So almost there. Fantastic, go for it.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from the Netherlands. It's really a pleasure to talk about this topic of urban heat. I'm super interested in it and also very keen to hear the other panelists talk. So yeah, I will give a little bit of a presentation around all the heat-related work that we have been doing at the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. Which I have been supporting over the past year, but a lot of credits to my colleagues who have done a lot on this topic. So just a quick background on the Climate Center, because maybe some of you know the Climate Center, maybe some of you don't. I'm sure you all know the Red Cross. So basically the Climate Center is a little bit of an extension of the Red Cross. And our goal is really to support all the branches, all the different Red Crosses and Red Crescents around the world, to help them reduce impacts from climate change, which also includes preparing and dealing with extreme heat. And heat has actually been one of the main focuses in our urban team. So lots of projects going on, and I will give an overview of some of those. So over the past years, we have worked on a lot of guidance and campaigning materials. So first of all, the Heatwave Guide for City was launched in 2019, which is a very simple guidance explaining sort of everything you need to know about understanding heat in cities and how also to get your city to address heat risks. And I think it's a really nice, simple explainer. So also if you want to know a little bit more about heat, this is a great resource. And we've also developed a specific guidance for the Red Cross branches with sort of activity sheets and questions they can ask different actors in their city. And one thing that I always find very important to note, coming also from a little bit of a background around geoinformation myself, is that within a city there are really often large differences in heat risk and in vulnerability that contribute to some people can deal with extreme heat and others can't. And where do these people live and how do they move throughout a city? And mapping these types of vulnerability and exposure can really help us understand and prioritize strategies to deal with heat. So here you can see, for example, two maps. The top one is from Nairobi and the bottom from Johannesburg. And you can see the differences of heat. And not only temperature is important, but also mapping socioeconomic information. There was one study that I just want to mention that was done in Akure in Nigeria, which showed that people in richer neighborhoods were way better adapted to heat because they could have AC, ceramic tiles, and shady plants. So, you know, if you have the financial means in whichever city, maybe you can cope with the heat. But in other areas, it's more difficult. And I think it's also important to mention informal areas. Often these areas are not included in city planning efforts, but usually these are the areas where people have the least means to change their daily activities, to take a day off when it's hot, or to adapt their house to be cooler. We have a bunch of campaign materials in some languages, some infographics, and we also have a Heat Action Day every year. Next year will be the 3rd edition, so where we work together with all the Red Crosses around the world to raise awareness about heat action. So hopefully you'll see that in your city coming up next year in June. We also have this guidance, the Urban Action Kit, which is a sort of low-cost do-it-yourself guide with a lot of different activities to help create more resilient communities in urban spaces. So you can read some of the case studies across African cities, and it's kind of really practical. You have these different activity sheets with the different steps, level of difficulty, level of people you might need for it, and it's. I think what is nice about this is it's not specifically focusing on heat, but you can see many of these activities contribute to well-being in general. So if it's better prepared to heat, but also to rain, having this holistic perspective is also quite important. Next, onto some research. I'm a researcher myself, so I think it's super interesting. We know that there is really a big lack of research in many African countries on heat and health, which limits action because decision makers basically don't know what's going on, and heat has been long ignored, basically. So what we did was launch a small research grant together with a few partners listed here, like the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, for research on countries where there was little research. And many studies were completed, including 6 studies across the African continent by local researchers on 3 different topics. So the first topic was to identify what are the thresholds above which we experience sort of extreme heat, because this can be different for every country. The second topic was around public perceptions towards heat. And the third one, to identify strategies to influence policy and action. So some results, here you can see a figure that summarizes across these studies sort of what were the barriers and solutions to adapt to heat stress. Some of the results from these studies in the African countries, people reported impacts from heat. They reported impacts on health, on their livelihoods, water, environment, and on their social life. And I thought this was really interesting because often we talk about how risk perception around heat is so low and people don't realize that they're being affected by heat because they have been living in a hot country for a long time, but they were actually noticing these impacts on their daily lives. And they mentioned to the researchers that they were happy that they came to talk to them about this problem, and that nobody else had ever come to them about this topic yet. And a basic result was also that there was very little attention from governments in general to address heat risks. One other interesting result that I put here was that although we talk a lot about reforestation and greening as an adaptation strategy, some studies mention that greening is not always a feasible strategy. For example, some places don't have enough space to plant trees or add vegetation around. And also some countries don't have the right climate for certain types of trees to properly grow. Of course, we can think of other ways to add greenery in our cities, like on roofs or in a different way, or think about vegetation that is adapted to heat. But these were things mentioned by these studies. And then here on the right side, you can see a picture of one of the studies done in South Africa that found a reversed urban heat island effect, quite interesting as well. I don't know how it compares to the other evidence in South Africa specifically, but it basically showed that actually the area surrounding the cities was quite dry and therefore contained a higher temperature than within some of the neighborhoods in cities where people were planting trees, which was not common for the local sort of environment and climate. Another study done in northern Ghana showed that people recognized their building was contributing to heat, but they really couldn't do much about it since they didn't have the economic means. And another interesting result is that these people also sometimes have to deal with cold. So it depends on the climate, of course, but it's important to think about both, because if you only adapt your house to heat and then maybe in the winter you are suffering from the cold. So it's important to think about these questions. This is another research project that's currently ongoing. We did a big research scoping report on indoor heat, because a lot of the research and action is going towards outdoor heat, and just heat in general, but there's quite some gaps in understanding what makes people vulnerable and what are safe indoor thresholds. And from all the evidence that we did find, again, there was a big concentration of this research, for example, in the US and Europe, but limited for other countries. And in this report, we summarize 4 main topics. So what are the personal risk factors to indoor overheating? How the built environment also affects indoor heat risks. Talked about issues of equity and justice and strategies to reduce the risk of indoor overheating. So if you already would like a copy of this, please reach out and I'm happy to chat more about it. Some gaps that were found that I quickly wanted to mention was it's important to know the cost effectiveness of different solutions and also their feasibility across different cities, contexts related to the local political, social, and economic realities. And also how the built environment might affect your behavior and sort of the duration that you spend time doing different indoor activities. So those are just some gaps for the built environment specifically. Lastly, we have a very exciting ongoing project on extreme heat in 3 different countries: Tanzania, Honduras, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. 4. So these are, in Tanzania, we focus on Tanga and Zanzibar cities. And the objectives are of the heat component of this project are to study and increase risk perceptions of extreme heat, to then also develop some campaigns to raise awareness, to develop heat action plans. So basically, we're doing this together with the Tanzania Red Cross, and my colleague who is based there is really supporting this work. And also to work together with the Met Service, for example, to strengthen early warning systems. And lastly, we want to work on promoting adaptation in the built environment. So it's really important here, the aspect of collaboration across sectors and engaging multiple actors. So together with the Red Cross, we really try to build these city coalitions. And the Red Cross has written many guidances around this, because heat really affects all sectors. So who's responsible to deal with it, and who should take the lead? These are very interesting questions. So here I've just listed a few of the important sectors. And specifically for the built environment in this project, one is to promote locally applicable actions. So if you have examples from different cities across the African continent, I would be super keen to hear more about that and to learn from the success stories. And also we would like to develop a virtual short course on heat in the built environment, really tailored to the local context, and do this in collaboration with local architects and universities. That is all for now. Yeah, really looking forward to hear more from you. And if any questions, please write them in the chat and reach out. Thank you.
Super, thank you. And there are plenty of questions and requests for you in the chat. I think you're going to be kept busy for the next couple of minutes. Right, I've got a long list of interesting facts that I'm gathering here, and I'm hoping we get to reflect at the end of the session. But in the interest of time, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who is Candice. Candice is actually my colleague from the city of Cape Town. And so we're going to drop in from now, having had that kind of global, continental perspective from Carolina. We're going to drop into what a city is doing. And Candice and our colleague Amy have been doing a lot of work around heat action plan. And so without any more fumbling through your amazing work, I'm going to hand over to you. Hopefully you can share your screen easily. There we go. Oh, that's me again. That's terrible.
Can you see that?
I saw myself in big screen again. Now I can see the presentation. Perfect, go for it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry guys,
in presentation mode.
Yeah, I'm just gonna put off my camera because our
Sure.
electricity was supposed to go on at 6. It hasn't yet, load shedding. So I don't want to disturb the internet when it goes back on.
Okay.
So just putting off my camera for now.
Sorry, everyone. We're in South Africa and we have load shedding amongst all the other excitement.
Which increases our heat risk during summer, by the way. Okay. So unfortunately, I haven't included our temperature projections and our temperature analysis, but I think Aline gave a great presentation on what is expected for Africa, or what Africa is currently experiencing. So I'm going to start my presentation giving some background to factors contributing to increasing heat risk in Cape Town. And like the speakers already mentioned, like many other cities, the urban heat island effect features prominently across Cape Town. We have these very dense built up neighborhoods without green spaces or far from green spaces, which increases the risk to heat for people living in those environments. The city is also experiencing challenge with an existing high demand for public health facilities and health services, in addition to numerous health challenges due to both communicable and non-communicable disease. These health issues outlined in the table are in addition to the direct impacts of heat, which our first speaker talked about, which is like such as heat stroke, heat cramps, or exhaustion. And then we're also considering the health challenges caused by a lack of sleep and rest due to increasing nighttime temperatures and the time it takes a house or your house to cool down. And they also have homes that are not designed for heat, especially our older buildings. Some houses do not have any insulation. And informal structures in our informal settlements are built with corrugated iron, as in the picture there. There are also challenges with affordability of high electricity tariffs and a lack of access to electricity. And that hinders people's ability to use fans for cooling, because people will prioritize electricity for based on what they can afford, and that will go to cooking and lights first. And there's the same for water use. People are going to prioritize how they use water based on their affordability. And then in the background, there's also some high crime areas. So people are not able to open their windows to just allow airflow or keep it open for long periods of time for the house to cool down. And then our summer season is also associated with crowded beaches and roads and a high demand for swimming. This brings along various safety and security issues, including drowning and kids, mostly kids swimming in areas not designated for swimming and thus not supervised. And lastly, Cape Town summers are hot and dry, so people identify heat as part of the climate. So we are used to it and therefore cope with it. But on the other hand, the city is also well known for its beautiful and eventful summers, which overlaps with our festive season and our summer holidays. So everyone is in a good mood, making memories, catching up with friends and family. Some people travel from all over to come down to Cape Town to see family and friends during that time. So people do not associate heat with any kind of risk, and that's a risk in itself. Eleni talked about the vulnerable groups. So we've identified 14 vulnerable groups in Cape Town, and these are just some of the main risk groups. We've also identified vulnerable sectors, which are sectors that it's basically all of our sectors, but these are sectors that's going to be impacted by heat, but also sectors that need to ensure heat readiness and business continuity because of the role they play in service delivery, especially during the hot season. So this was just an overview of challenges on the surface. As our speakers previously mentioned, when you go deeper into the household or community context, additional things will pop up. But I hope this overview painted a little bit of how straightforward responding to it can be, but also the complexity it has for local government. So I'm going to talk a bit now about heat response in Cape Town's climate change strategy and action plan. So our heat response in the action plan follows a four-pronged approach. This includes emergency planning, preparedness and response to specifically high heat days and heat waves, long-term adaptation measures that help reduce urban heat islands, strengthening the evidence base, so research, data development, and knowledge management, and public awareness initiatives and community engagement around heat risk and urban greening. I'm just going to go briefly through the main actions that contributes to this four-pronged approach. You will see at the bottom is an indication of which department leads the specific work area, and the 23 action status. So action 1.1 is work that our department is leading, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the development of a heatwave and high heat day action plan later in the presentation. We're also planning to explore sometime in the future the development of a network of cooling centers, mainly looking at using existing buildings and not building new buildings, basically. And then the development of an early warning and real-time monitoring system for heat. Then we also have our urban greening actions, which includes an urban greening program and a focused tree planting program. We also have our livable urban waterways program, our green infrastructure program, and work being implemented around ecosystem goods and services, maintaining ecosystems goods and services through conservation, protection, and restoring our critical biodiversity areas. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the development of a heatwave and high heat day action plan. So the heat action plan does not cover long-term heat mitigation measures aimed at reducing the urban heat island effect, or it also doesn't cover long-term heat adaptation measures in terms of green building design and implementation or urban design tools. Those are all initiatives built into other city plans and strategies related to some of the actions I just mentioned. The focus of the heat action plan is to ensure and increase readiness, specifically to risk related to heat waves and high heat days. So if there's a warning issued by our South African weather services, what does the city need to do? If the city is going through a heat wave or experiencing a high heat day, what does the city do? So the overall purpose of the heat action plan is to prevent, respond, and contain heat-related risk to city operations, infrastructure and staff, because we also need to ensure business continuity, especially during hot times, heat waves and high heat days, and also the public and vulnerable groups and communities. This plan includes 11 actions that are categorized across 3 components, which are heat readiness, that refers to preparation ahead of heat events to ensure that effective planning is in place. Heat response looks at response shortly before and during a heat wave or high heat day, although planning takes place in advance. And then we have heat-related research and knowledge management, and this is to ensure effective research and knowledge sharing to support and inform decision-making regarding heat response and heat readiness. This is just an overview of the actions of our heat action plan. The plan is not formally approved yet. We are in that process, but we have started initial exploration of actions, of the actions in bold. Action 1.1 is actually already implemented. I'm not going to give a detailed update, but if there are any questions around the actions, I'm happy to provide more detail. Yeah, so considering the challenges and the 14 vulnerable groups that I mentioned earlier, as well as our heat island areas, I know I didn't outline all of the groups, and also our temperature increases and projected climate change projections for temperature. Ensuring that the public is enabled to effectively respond to and reduce their risk to heat requires planning to be centered around our vulnerable groups. So an example is how, or some of the examples, is how the city is prioritizing tree planning and survival through data and technology that can help with monitoring and management of our trees. Because tree survival in Cape Town is a massive challenge, and it's a big challenge in our vulnerable communities due to various issues. Another example is work that forms part of the city's food systems program, which is led by Tamsin. The team is currently undertaking a study looking into the co-benefits of community food gardens, which includes a component on heat mitigation and heat adaptation. Other examples is our green infrastructure network that has been included in the city's metropolitan spatial development framework, amongst other initiatives aiming to mainstream green infrastructure planning. And our Livable Urban Waterways program is a program that was also developed with communities and other external stakeholders to ensure that the program also provides other social co-benefits that address social challenges and needs. So when considering heat risk, planners need to understand how those vulnerable groups that's at higher risk to heat move and interact. So does that involve moving within or between different heat islands? So traveling between work and home using maybe public transport, or a mom walking with a toddler or a baby um, towards the bus stop or the taxi stop and waiting in the sun for her public transport to arrive. If we become more aware of these interactions and movement, we will be able to better define what access to open spaces and open green spaces mean for groups that are vulnerable to heat. This is just another example of movement. So looking at heat risk and parks and other spaces often used by small children and an adult accompanying them, an adult that may have chronic diseases, that may have chronic issues, that may have, that may be an elderly person, that may be a woman or pregnant woman. So we need to think, do these spaces reduce heat risk for children and for their caretaker? And what does that mean? Is there enough shade, benches? Is there a tap nearby? Or do we need to consider materials used for the equipment in the park? Yeah, just thinking, how are we able to reduce heat risk in these spaces, but centering a vulnerable group or a vulnerable user in that thinking? Then we also have spaces where people have to queue trying to enter a facility. That's a picture of our public swimming pool in the corner. It's a very long line, and with increasing heat and increasing temperatures, we are going to expect more people standing in those lines, and also people waiting in line to access a clinic. And sometimes it's not going to be about planning, but more about thinking out of the box and understanding what external factors increases heat risk and how that risk can be reduced. And this is also something that we want to look at through our heat action plan, and conducting sector-based heat risk assessments and working with departments to develop appropriate response mechanisms. And then we have people living in informal settlements and low-cost residential housing with a range of challenges and limited resources when it comes to cooling and greening, as I've previously mentioned. So are there any existing concepts that we can scale down in such a way that it can be applicable to the context of these neighborhoods, keeping in mind these different challenges that they have? So if anyone has any ideas or have previously worked in similar challenges, in challenging areas, sorry, please, it would be really great to have a chat. Yeah, and this is also based on another part of our heat action plan, which is about communication and outreach. So we want to communicate applicable messaging and propose context-relevant heat response interventions at the individual and household level. So meaning that we want to communicate, I mean, whatever we communicate needs to consider the specific target audience, and whatever we communicate and whatever intervention we propose needs to be implementable. It needs to consider context and the challenges, for example, financial household context. So it needs to consider all of those things. And this is also something that's quite challenging, because we are also currently exploring the development of such a plan and message and specific interventions. So any ideas, any work that people has previously done would really be awesome. Yeah, we can chat online here, or you can email me. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thanks, Candice. And I'm looking to the chat with great interest to see who's going to get in touch. Right, and please, if you do want to get hold of Candice or any of the speakers afterwards, I'm sure I can share their email addresses with you, unless, of course, they ask me not to. Moving on to our next presenter, James McGregor, who will be sharing a process used to identify nature-based solutions for adaptation in areas of vulnerability, as well as the sensitivity analysis and adaptation capacity. I will be sharing James's presentation for him. If I can
do it. I
find the
have no problem doing it.
Right, here we go. Oh, sorry, would you like to do it?
Oh, I hit the share screen button.
Go for it.
Okay, just let me check the time because 15 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I suspect we're going to be a little bit over, but hopefully everyone's interested enough to just stick
Okay,
around a little until the end.
I can't desktop. Doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, we're not seeing anything on my side.
Why don't we do it your way?
Sure. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, it's just been amazing the amount of information I've accumulated for this particular presentation. Do you want to go on full screen or on hello? Voila, voila. The amount of information I've accumulated it can sort of dump into this particular planning process. I'm just going to stand back for a while and look at the general adaptation strategy or adaptation planning process and address it to those, as we have here, individuals that are actively involved in climate change adaptation. Next. I guess I'm a little bit focused on landscape architect, being a landscape architect for a long time. I'm really wanting to see landscape architecture become much more involved, particularly in nature-based ecosystem, nature and ecosystem-based planning, because we're trained as planners, yet, when you look at the number of, say, municipalities or regions out there that have adaptation strategies, they're very, very few. They're very, very needed. And we have a lot of the skills in collaboration with the scientific community to respond to that. Next. Just briefly, I'm sure most of the presenters know what I'm talking about here, but just to define the difference between adaptation and resilience. Resilience being the capacity or ability to anticipate, cope, or in 15, 30 years, we will be much more prepared for the type of changes in the heat situation, as we've talked about today, as well as in any other event that's coming down the tube because of climate change. Next. Generally, landscape adaptation planning is a little different than others because it does take a long-term perspective. I mean, when we start talking about statistics for 2050, 2060, when, by the way, some of the trees that we start planting now will actually have their impact, we really do need a longer term perspective than we typically take in the planning process. And we also need to really recognize the role that research is playing. I've just come back from doing the keynote at the International Conference on Climate Change in Indonesia. And it was attended by about 100 climate scientists. And I was just amazed at how much information they've, all with their little bits of information, but the notion is that there's a lot of research going on. It's not being used perhaps to its best advantage in terms of some of the situations that we have to face. So we have to be reaching out to the research committee at two levels. Number one, to gather the information that they've been developing. And number two, perhaps starting to shape the type of research that's going to go on in the next say the next 10, 15 years that really can feed into the type of work that we're going to be doing. Okay, in terms of the planning process, based on the type of work I've been doing from the Caribbean to Saudi Arabia, I have a 5-phase process. I'll only focus on phase 1, 2, and 3 with the time that's available. But obviously, and this is not unknown to anybody who does planning, with phase 1 being the launch of the program, phase 2 being the research, or what we sometimes call analysis, phase 3 being the actual planning process itself, phase 4, the implementation of the plans, and then phase 5, something that most planners don't get enough chance to do, but that is the constant monitoring of the impact of our adaptation strategy. Next. So just briefly, in terms of the phases themselves, very much of an emphasis in that first phase, and I'm glad it was brought up so many times here today, working with local groups, working with municipal planners, working with municipal departments if we're doing municipal work, and then developing a climate change adaptation plan, adaptation team, which is largely responsible for gathering the political support as well as maintaining momentum. In phase 2, again, going back to all of the available research that's available, and I'm always amazed when I start doing adaptation strategies at just how much information is out there. Unfortunately, it's very segmented and sometimes very, very focused on a particular plant or particular soil type, which is very good. I mean, it's all information we need, but it's never really brought together to do what we're talking about here, which is an adaptation strategy, which also looks at vulnerability areas, special areas, sensitivity analysis, and adaptive capacity. Next. And then for the next 3 phases, phase 3 being the planning itself, starting with the goals and objectives all the way through to the action plan in terms of the schedule, in terms of the cost, etc. And then the actual implementation in the field of the various adaptation solutions that we proposed. And as I say, the ongoing monitoring and review of the type of impacts that we've had. So looking at phase 1, next. Next. The program launch itself, where I placed a major emphasis on bringing the stakeholders together and creating an adaptation team that can follow the project through to its completion, and then actually after completion into the implementation stage. It's always nice to have a champion behind your initiatives towards adaptation. And that gives a type of voice, if you will, to what we're trying to do at several different levels, at the community level, right straight through to the municipal and policy level themselves, which may involve, or which frequently involves, the change to council policy or city council policy and orientation, and even the changes to urban plans. Next. We have to really be current, and again, looking at a broader scale adaptation process here to all of the drivers, including the variety of extreme events. I like to mention there was one week this week I was watching on Instagram, and they brought forward 11 countries that week that were in the stages of significant flooding. I mean, yes, we've had some record-breaking heat, but we've also had some record-breaking weather systems that have caused intense flooding and lots of course, damage and associated deaths. So looking at all of the various drivers, and particularly those which provide co-benefits, that is, where we can be looking at an initiative that not only addresses adaptation, but also at the same time resilience and mitigation, that is reducing, say, the CO2 levels. So there's a variety of different contexts we have to look at with respect to identifying what are the key forces in any particular area that are driving the forces of climate change. Next. Again, I place a lot of emphasis on the internal stakeholder assessment and external. Internal being, well, in the case of a municipality, the basic municipal services, be they emergency services or town council or public relations departments, etc., and the external being those being associated with the regional, perhaps regional governments and other industry associations and universities. I bring it up here, having just come from a university in Indonesia that's doing a lot of research. But again, they provide the opportunity to start looking at real adaptive and resilient solutions to climate change. So we need to be keeping them very much in the focus, and if they're not giving us enough information, we have to be perhaps pushing them, and which they seem to adapt to quite well because they want to be current with better research on what in fact we should be doing. And then the climate change adaptation team itself, representing a broad sector of the urban environment. So I've listed a few of them here. Next. And then within that working groups, really developing, and again, we're only in phase 5, really developing the mandate to develop the strategy and to create a context and a schedule and a set of activities, if you will, an inception report that enables us to move forward. And again, within the context perhaps of having a significant climate change champion or adaptation or resilient champion. And it can be an agency as well, but certainly a voice that's out there that demonstrates to the community the seriousness of moving forward with the type of strategies that we will be presenting. Next. And then again, the different systems that are involved. It's not just the social system or the ecological systems as we've been talking about, but looking at all of the various physical systems, the infrastructure, particularly, for instance, if we're in a coastal area, and if we're talking Africa, we've got 40,000 kilometers of coastlines, so we have a lot of opportunity to start really looking at the type of impacts in the blue economy, for instance, and how climate change is radically affecting that system. And of course, wildfires have now become quite almost topical. I'm Canadian, and I think at one point we had 420 wildfires going on in Canada at the same time. Air index off the charts in terms of the quality of air in Montreal and Ottawa and Vancouver, etc. So we've got all of these issues to be embracing, if you will, at the same time within these different systems. Next. And then in phase 2, then we really get into the analysis of the various information that is available, and the next slide starts that. Looking at first of all, as any planning process doing, really looking at our purpose, which is to research the climate change and impacts for the region or for the municipality. And then projecting that out over a longer time. I mean, if you look at, say, Climate Central, I mean, a lot of their standards are now for 2050. So there's good information there, but we have to be walking back and saying, okay, to achieve any sort of adaptation by 2050, we are going to have to start to do this in 2025 to 2030, etc. We also have so many countries now looking towards zero-based carbon emissions, carbon neutrality by 2050, which is going to have itself a significant impact on climate change adaptation, but we have to start planning for that now. I mean, I've noticed so many countries, including here in Morocco, that have said, yes, net zero by 2050, but I don't see anything in place, at this point that says that's going to happen. And of course, as we get to 2050, it's probably going to be changed to 2060. I don't know, but the point being that what we need to be planning for, we need to be doing right now. Next. And then again, working with limited information in many cases, or the information that's available is only a sliver of what we're actually needing. So we need to be updating information and accessing much better information, and being sure that the people that are producing the information, is one thing to say, okay, we have got this information, but what is the level of expertise? And in fact, who is this information developed for? So within that context, we have in the second phase, we have a substantial amount of effort going into looking at existing research and the analysis of that research. Next. Well, adaptation is really based on, and as we've seen in previous presentations with with heat islands, etc., really looking at a variety of what we call service areas across the urban context, each one with its potential, with potentially being significantly impacted by the changing climate. I've listed several of them here, being typically the most important, but biodiversity, businesses, how are businesses going to be affected? What is going to happen with the economic development of a city, and particularly I'm involved in tourism, and we've seen some pretty significant negative impacts on tourism this summer because people just did not want to travel to some of the areas that were just too hot. I mean, Greece, for example, had a decline, and again because of people really reduced travel to places like New York and Montreal this summer because of forest fires. So all of these service areas, you wonder why I have agriculture there? Well, because any municipality is based on a lot of local agricultural production. So if we have droughts and we have water issues related to agricultural production and food security, we have to be identifying that and addressing it in the plan. Next. So we take these identify areas and we take a situation like increased summer temperatures, and we start to identify within each one of these service areas the type of impacts that it could have. For instance, if we're talking about increased summer temperatures, we're going to have increased energy demand, we're going to have greater opportunity for drought and reduced food supply, decreased tourism, as I've mentioned, loss perhaps of native plants, increase in invasive species, increased levels of fires and wildfires, increased insect outbreaks, infectious disease increases, etc. So we need to be looking at all of those known impacts and start to address them at the service level, at each one of those service levels, by a notion of whether they're high, medium, low. Why do we need to do that? Because that gives us some level of understanding of the type of priorities that we need to be bringing into the adaptation strategies. Next. Looking at vulnerable assessments and the ability of given services to harm created by the climate change impacts themselves. And then we have to put that into some sort of consideration in terms of the accommodation for the particular weather patterns, the barriers to the type of services that we may see adapting, and those areas that are already stressed. I mean, I think we find that in some of the presentations we've seen this afternoon. There are areas that are currently under severe stress, or vulnerable populations under severe stress, and we should be looking at those initially as high priority areas. And again, in the next one, I deal with sensitivity assessment.
Sorry, James, we're
Yep.
going to run out of time. Can you?
Okay. I've just got 3 more.
Okay.
Okay. Sensitivity assessment, obviously looking at those areas that have limiting factors that cannot really adapt as well as we would like in the short term. And then finally, in the adaptive capacity. Next. Next, please. Okay, looking at the key determinants of adaptive capacity in terms of economic resources. As somebody said today, the wealthier regions have greater opportunity for adapt. Looking at the technology that's available, if there is opportunities in major cities to have access to certain technologies, information and skills. Skilled personnel. I mean, we're not going to adapt to climate change unless we've got some significant skills associated with them. And therefore, the relationship with universities and school systems, et cetera, or institutions to develop some of this adaptive capacity is very important. And then finally, equity, making sure that what we're doing is distributing this across the entire spectrum. So with that information, then we are in a position to develop an adaptation strategy and prepare the strategy. But I'll leave it at that, because after that, it's pretty standard procedures in terms of developing timelines, cost estimates, who's responsible, when they're responsible for it, and how much it's going to cost throughout the development of the plan. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. There's a few more slides, but if people are interested in the slides, then they can obviously come and pick them up at this site. So there's the final adaptation plan, including starting with an executive summary, having clause. Anyways, that's pretty standard procedure. The point being, though, that the build-up to this is something that's different than most planning procedures because of the amount of time that's required to start having serious adaptation solutions, and then, of course, the training of the individuals that are necessary to implement them. Thank you very much.
Super, thanks, James. And so sorry for rushing you. There's nothing worse than having to rush presenters.
Yep.
I'm so
It's your job. It's your job.
Sorry, guys. Right. So without any further ado, now we can look at some of the projects, getting right down to the kind of the project scale and case studies. I have great pleasure in introducing Dimitra Theokari, I hope I said that okay, who's going to be giving us some Nordic examples, bearing in mind that we are in Africa, but I think we need to be learning from projects that are on the ground. And importantly, she'll be sharing stories about multi-benefit solutions with proven financial and ecological benefits, which I think we all know is something that we all battle with as landscape architects. And how do you motivate for green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? Dimitra, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, everybody, from my side as well. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see.
We can see your screen, but you're not in presenter mode just yet.
Yes. Okay, great. So I just want to say a couple of words about myself. I'm an architect and landscape architect. I currently work in a company called ATP, which is very strong in Austria and Germany. And we are committed to changing the world through the way we develop the built environment. There's a lot of culture on how to achieve this, and it's the focus is very strong on integrated design and integrated planning, how it is called in Germany, Integral Planung. And there's also a very strong commitment to the European Green Deal. And there's a specific spin-off company that's specifically focused on this topic. Because the time is limited, I jump, from talking generically about how one can deal with heat risk reduction through urban planning. And I will focus on specifically these case studies that I have organized in these different categories, as you see, because the focus generally is how to maximize the integration of nature-based solutions. And to achieve this, I have organized them into 7 categories that have to do with rainwater management, vertical greening systems and green roofs, remediation, treatment, recovery, soil and water bioengineering, river restoration, or generally ecological restoration. It's just river and waterways are the most significant of spaces for restoration because of ecological function reasons, public green spaces, and finally food and biomass productions that are topics that are very important for municipalities. So I have a few case studies per topic, starting from the rainwater management, and I will go pretty fast through them. I have focused particularly in smaller scale studies because I am of the opinion and in my experience that it's very important to see what one can achieve in small scale, because these kind of projects are easier to communicate with the municipality and see results more easily, and the budget is smaller. So this project is the Potsdamer Platz. It is in Freiburg in Germany. What is significant about this project is that this project was a typical competition. It didn't have any high ecological goals to achieve. However, the landscape architect came in with the very specific initiative. This has been developed by Hamburg Student Reisseite, a company that I used to work for. And this company is very committed in ecological design. So basically they came into this project and they decided to maximize the benefits of this potential plaza. And this is something that one should do in all projects, in my experience and in my recommendation. So basically, instead of just designing a typical plaza on a small plaza somewhere in Germany that is not like really significant, the target here was to completely separate this plaza from the city, the sewer system of the city, the municipality sewer, which means that all the water that falls on this plaza in any event, also like including in 100-year flood event, has to stay in this plaza. This means that the topography doesn't go towards the street, but it gathers water on the plaza. It penetrates the ground through the different openings of greenery and different other like slits that happen with integration of historic trainway lines that used to exist in the area. And all this water gathers to fill an underground water reservoir that is used for irrigation of the trees throughout the year. The size of it is measured, that it's possible to cover the needs for the whole year, even the longest and hottest period. And the overflow of the system goes to the groundwater reservoir. And also any potential like infiltration happens through the system and recharges the groundwater reservoir. And so it's very important that one designer, when they design spaces, they start to want to achieve more than what is requested from the procurement or competition or any kind of process that is requested. In the same vein, there's so many solutions that we know from the past years, including rainwater management solutions like bioswales. I will not expand on this because these solutions are very well known. I just want to show this example for California, which shows that this can be successful in hotter climates, so it can be definitely successful in Southern Europe, and definitely like in Northern Africa and Southern Africa for sure. So for vertical systems and greening systems, it's very important to have in mind that in very hot climates, there are more extensive solutions that one can achieve, and there are many different solutions that can happen. I have an example here from Egypt that one can see how in a small roof one can find different solutions to integrate different planting. And it's really important also to combine it with other economical and ecological use of the roof of the buildings. This means to integrate topics of agriculture or herbs, but also generally extensive solutions, because it's very important to maximize the effect of a green roof in all kind of shading structures and all kind of surfaces in the city, like including buses or other solutions. A really great case study that I think can be replicable in different countries of the South is this example from Spain. When one finds often these kind of situations, these spaces that they're just like backyards, there's a lot of hardscape, they don't really have a use. And one can see that with very light systems and hanging plants that basically they are ground-based, one can achieve a lot with creating a new environment. And you can see the difference in feeling and how people are attracted to this kind of situations. And these solutions actually have a pretty low budget, because there's many solutions that one can see from green walls that are actually quite expensive and I don't want to expand to those. Also, they're very difficult to sustain in hot climates, but these are the successful solutions in my experience. Another topic is to integrate topics of remediation, treatment, and recovery. This can also happen in hot climates, as we know. There are different solutions, also from Africa, from creating a series of like channels to cleansing water, or generally combined sewer overflow systems. This can be very successful. They can also be integrated in different green walls or green roofs. And then I go to a topic that I think is really significant, the topic of river restoration of constructed wetlands. And this can be expanded to lake restoration, or generally any kind of ecological restoration in relation to areas that touch waterways. So this is an example from China. It's a very famous park. The landscape architects of the team of the group should be very familiar with it. So one can see that what is possibly achievable within a couple of years to turn a landscape that looks like this to a green landscape, when one makes the correct decisions of basically how to bring water from the top side, pass it through different terraces of different heights, as you can see here, with different in different levels, but also with different kinds of vegetation. And through the system, the water can be cleansed. So in this specific example from the Hutan Park in Shanghai, the Huangpu River that you see here, it has a small tributary that this whole that the water passes through, and this tributary is basically represented with a series of wetlands, and the water is cleansed from a category 5 to category 2, which is like the water that one can shower with, which is really amazing. Another really famous project that one needs to have in mind for river restoration is the Bisanamoke Park. It is in the same vein with the project that Lenore showed earlier from Seoul about opening a river corridor and changing the constructed built environment to a very living landscape that actually is actually quite man-made. To achieve this, one has to do different studies in order to find the right vegetation. There are always solutions in all climates. There's also solutions in California. This is a smaller project of river restoration from Germany that you can see here, that if one really understands how the rivers flow and what functions the different banks of the rivers play, one can understand that the same function of stabilizing the water bank can be achieved with different elements, as you see here, that allow the water to go through. So very light elements like silt traps, or small, how to say, topography change with vegetation can actually create the same function, and this can create an area for potential ecological use of the new area and habitat for different species. This can also be achieved in very, very tiny spaces, as you see this creek here also in Germany. There are different solutions like crib walls and different soil bioengineering solutions that can be integrated in order to achieve this. And it's really important to understand how different the images before and after, and the narrative to explain this is really important. And I find really amazing in this specific project that this image exists, that you can see that this is an image and this is a cutout. So one can see the difference in real time of how it was before versus how it is that particular day. And I think these topics are also really important to integrate for people to understand the difference in the kind of like landscapes they design or experience. More the soil and water bioengineering solutions that are integrated in the previous river restoration topic, and generally waterfront restoration. This can also be integrated in different topography changes, in different new constructed landscapes, as you see here, this project from Spain. It shows how it completely changes the experience from having a completely vegetated biodiverse crib wall opposite to just having any other solution of dealing with the topography, with concrete or basically anything else. And one can imagine the support of biodiversity that can happen through this biodiverse planting that is planted here. Of course, in order to achieve this, this is a more specific image from the river project that I showed earlier here. One more back. Oh, sorry. from this project, the Pisana Monkey Park. One has to develop specific studies in order to see the right vegetation and also the different slopes and shear stress that this vegetation can hold. Because in Central and Northern Europe, these studies have already happened, so it's very well known which kind of plants should be placed in different areas and in what ways. But in other parts of the world, as for example, for this project, before this project was made, this information didn't exist. So there's studies necessary to achieve this. Generally for green space, because there's so many projects one can show, I have focused on this really successful project from Copenhagen because it shows very clearly, in my opinion, the importance to change the thinking on the permeability of the pavement, and also how it's very important to actually minimize the need for circulation to actually the absolute minimum that one needs to cross a space. By doing this, the green is maximized and it allows for a lot of plant biodiversity to be established and designed within the system that later can attract biodiversity. By that I mean like fauna and insects populations, etc. And it's really important to change the way we look at even the smallest spaces and the tiniest of situations, because especially when they're shaded, they can be a great home for plants that find it difficult to survive in the hotter temperatures. So it's really important to have this in mind, that we need to create these small niches everywhere that we can. And one should shift their mind from the thinking of just cleaning out spaces and that something is too small, nothing can be achieved there. Because many times it's really important to change the way we think about projects and this temporary use of spaces. I think it's really important to show the importance of breaking the asphalt or the concrete in order to bring biodiversity. And for this, I have different projects to show how this can be achieved from different countries. This is from France here, on how one can decide to cut an area that actually the paving is not needed, and to start to plant different vegetation in between and keeping the material within, because it would be also ideal in these nature-based solutions to combine topics of circular city apart from heat risk reduction. Another project that one can break the asphalt also from Paris is this asphalt jungle. It is really amazing how much the landscape changed from this huge parking lot to this chaotic and kind of creepy space to a really fantastic landscape, and how this has been represented from the landscape architects, how sensitive the drawings have to be in order to bring these messages. Another really important topic that we have communicated with different municipalities, and we see great success in them understanding how easy it is to implement, is the topic of ultra-dense forests. So basically, these are forests, very small areas of maximizing biodiversity, where the plants are planted incredibly close to each other and they are left alone. There are different solutions for this. They can be integrated in parks. This is a principal section. Basically, all the possible biodiversity is combined in a really small area. In this kind of situations, it has been proven that in this case, the plants grow 10 times faster, there's 20 times more biodiversity, and they are planted 30 times denser as normal. There's different ways this has been implemented in different countries. I personally am a fan of the solutions that people cannot access the spaces, they only experience them from outside, because I think it gives a very strong narrative. However, it is possible to allow for a minimal path in one really specific location that people can enjoy the spaces. These kind of concepts can start to be integrated in any kind of dead spaces that we see in the urban fabric. So they can be along corridors that are not really used, between buildings with dead facades and active streets, or they can be part of plazas. This is a different example that from Spain, from Zaragoza, from Spain, that there's really specific planting that has been maximized in its biodiverse, and it is a study to show how one can plant biodiversity in a small area, specifically targeted for heat mitigation. Lastly, on the topic of greenery in the city, I want to point out that any potential surface of the city that absolutely doesn't need to be impermeable should be permeable, and by permeable, ideally an open ground or green. And I think this is important to shift the way we think. Shading stations are a really important topic. They can have a lot of forms and they can change the way we look at the city. And of course, the topic of integrating wherever possible water playgrounds in any kind of space, plaza or park, wherever available. They can have, there are so many categories of them. They can be have a higher budget or low budget. They can be more urban or more formal or less. So all these solutions are very positive for heat risk reduction. Definitely the more natural, the better. Lastly, I want to talk shortly about the importance of bringing the topics of circular city, and because they have a big effect if one thinks holistically about solutions that we bring to the city. So how one can integrate topics of, like, as I said, agriculture and dealing with biomass, which is a topic that the municipalities really struggle with, and how one creates a better quality soil that the cities are really suffering from. There are a lot of solutions of thinking innovatively for biomass reuse, and from new products and new technologies, as you can see here, that are implemented already in different countries, including in Africa and Namibia. It's very important to bring these topics forward, or even paper production. So this, with this, I want to say, to show very shortly a project. Oh, do I have more time? Should I
Go for it. We're going to be
Okay.
late anyway, and it would be nice to see.
So I just do it super fast. So this is a project that we developed together with L'Union Metropolitan for the Atlantic Council and the Union Metropolitan Attica. And this is a series of guidelines that we have developed for the greater Athens area, for the Hadrian aqueduct that passes through different municipalities in Athens. We studied the effects of heat and how we can mitigate it. There were different workshops that took place. And the result of this is a very, very important document that we have created, that is this heat risk reduction guidelines for the cooling of the Hadrian aqueduct. So this is organized in 4 chapters. The water elements, green elements, material and municipality policies. I will not go deeply into this document because it's very dense information, very specifically made for the city of Athens. What it is important is that we have organized it in 3 typologies, and we have actually created guidelines that integrate the most innovative solutions, like from the most conventional good solutions that we see potentially applicable for heat risk reduction to the most innovative. So this is basically how the content of the document is, how the document looks, the specific guidelines for the different solutions. As I said, including irrigation systems, implementation of these water bags, integration of sustainable urban drainage systems. We explain very analytically the importance of biodiversity, green coverage. We have suggestions of how to redesign streets in different ways, and with also innovative proposals, and how one can integrate different really important topics in the specific situations of the city, like, for example, here, and how to integrate the ultra-dense forest that I just presented. We explained the principles of ecosystem services in relation to heat risk reduction, and we have a planting palette that has been organized in 3 levels on how to create, how to have vegetation coverage of low irrigation needs, medium irrigation needs, and high irrigation needs, because they have a different effect in heat risk reduction. And this is how the planting palette looks like, which can be used by the different municipalities in Athens for the procurement of different projects. For materials, the focus is on color, albedo, effects, permeability is already mentioned. The shading stations are really significant. And finally, the most important part of the document is the summary of creating, of actually summarizing this whole 100 I think 80 pages document of 130 pages, to 24 policies that are phrased really specifically in a way that can be voted by the different municipalities in Athens in order to create, to give space for better projects in the future. And we will be happy to share this document very soon. I'm not sure when the Atlantic Council will put it online, but it would be really great to check when it will be online, because we believe that a lot of the solutions really apply to topics in Africa, because also culturally there are commonalities, I would say, between the Greek context and the different African countries. And with this, I leave you, and sorry for taking more time.
Please don't be sorry. I'm glad we got to the last slides. They're very cool, and please, there's already a request in the comments to share.
Yes.
Super. So guys, we are over time, not as badly as we usually are. So thank you for sticking around. I would like to, we're not going to have a chance to go into detailed questions, unfortunately. Please put your email in the chat though. It would be nice to set up start to set up a community of practice. I think what's been super cool out of this session has been all the research that's happening, because that's been a really big point that's come through in a number of the presentations, is this lack of research that is specific to Africa. So if that's one to get a takeaway that we can use from this, then that's super cool. So yeah, put your email addresses in, and that gives me permission to then email you as well. Before we head off though, I would like to ask Lenio for some comment from you. You know, something inspirational, you know, what should we be taking away? How do we look to the UN Habitat, to the UN, to guide us and inspire us in this journey, this rapid journey that we need to be going on in terms of meeting the challenges of heat in the future. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I have no doubt that with all of this input and amazing content, that there are all sorts of ideas that will come up to the surface very quickly.
Thanks, Tams. And I think it was wonderful how we had a lot of different perspectives in this webinar, from like more methodological and normative to kind of more specific tools and more design solutions. And so it was like an amazing kind of combination of things. We should have had more time so we could have a little more discussion now, which is a pity. From the side of the UN Habitat is just now starting to deal with heat. I just started working there a few months ago. The idea is to kind of fold in to the normative tools, because this is mostly what UN Habitat does, right? It goes to cities and it basically assesses conditions of issues of equity, issues of accessibility, issues of sustainability and stuff like that. And how do we design cities and help the cities kind of assess how much they complete these criteria and what they should do about it. And the idea of having a heat officer is to fold all these different types of approaches and solutions and kind of make accessible to cities the type of tools that are out there, but also fold in their normative tools these kinds of discussions, and elevate the issue of advocate for making sure within the UN in general to have more attention to heat as the main problem that we're going to be dealing with. I love having always love being with landscape architects. It's my favorite group of people to be talking to. I think that I really try wherever I am to say how significant your contribution is to the future of the cities, to the future of our populations, and also to the future of the species of our planet, which is like really, really significant, and we never should forget, because we shouldn't, I mean, we tend to be extremely anthropocentric, and you guys in your profession often allows space for not being so anthropocentric, which is something we have to actually take into consideration these days, because we're all kind of we need solutions, and the solutions are not necessarily only for the people, and so I think that the future is with you on the side of the decision makers, and the people that make the plans, and the people that make the designs, and the people that implement. So I am really hoping that this community becomes much more powerful and prominent in the years to come, and we need you more than ever. Take care, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and I think you just warmed everybody's hearts on this call if they weren't warm already. Thank you so much to the speakers for joining us. It's been a marathon, but the complexity of everything that's climate related means that you do need to bring in a number of different voices. So it can never be done in an hour, even an hour and a half or two, as apparently is the case this evening. So before we close off, as we did with the previous webinar, we're talking about people's lives and people's dreams, and moving back to the people and the people in their environments. We're on a continent that's very vulnerable, and the work that we do has great significance, as Linnea has just pointed out. And to honor that gravitas of the topic and of the issues that we're dealing with, I would like to just say a little blessing on our work. It's not denominational specific. It's whichever God you want it to be. But God bless Africa, guard her children, guide her leaders, and give her peace. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll be putting this recording up on the IFLA website. I can email it through to everybody as well. You're welcome to share it. This is not a limited session, and hopefully we can take this conversation forward, and hopefully also connected with those you're hoping to connect with in the chat. But we will be putting some kind of a mailing list together as well, so that we can keep in touch better. And with that, please put your cameras on so that we can wave goodbye and say a proper hello and goodbye. It's been a gallop, but thanks for sticking around. Yay. Faces, that's the best. Awesome. I have no idea when the next webinar will be, but we will be putting something together, and hope to see some of your faces back again. Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.